Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. We are excited to be back. And so we hopefully have kept you over the Christmas break, but now we are pushing into the spring of 2026, which is wild to me. We're still technically in winter, I suppose, but we're pushing towards the spring semester of 2026. And with that being said, we are still going with the themes that we've been doing for the last couple months. And so last week we did an episode that was kind of just more of a New Year's episode because it was on New Year's. And you guys really, for the most part, seemed to enjoy that episode. So thank you for listening. We had quite a few listens right off the bat, which was great. And I think it's hopefully something that we can all kind of, hopefully it's something that we can kind of all hold on to this year as we continue on and move forward through what 2026 brings, because we're pretty early on. We have no idea. And so with that being said, that idea, if you haven't heard that episode, you should go back and listen to it first off. But if you haven't heard that episode, that idea was just basically New Year, same God. And even though there's all these things with New Year's resolutions and everything else that we strive for this better push of a version of ourselves, we kind of wrestled with the idea last week of this idea of this thought of maybe instead of changing all these things to make us better, maybe we just need to turn and rest in the God that never changes. And so with that being said, that was our push for really our push, hopefully, for the year of 2026. And so we'll be kind of seeing that probably pop up throughout the year. But we are moving into our theme for the month of January. And so we're going to spend the next 4 weeks looking at this idea of how we can move from noise to formation. And when we talk about that, basically the focus and the goal behind this is, as you're setting up 2026, as you're setting up the spring semester, our goal is to hopefully kind of have conversations and help navigate this idea of moving students from post-holiday digital overload, because if your kids or if your students are anything like my personal kids, they got more screen time than they've gotten all semester in the last 2 weeks. And so how do we move students from post-holiday digital overload towards spiritually formed, creative, and participatory faith? And so basically, how do we get their eyes off of the digital overload? How do we get them to stop worrying about that digital overload? And how do we get them back into the spiritual formative path and the participatory path that they hopefully were on this last semester as we were navigating the week to week of our ministries? And so we're going to look at a couple different things, but this week specifically, we are going to be talking about content to formation. And so we're basically just this idea that discipleship is not measured by how much students watch, but it is measured by who they are becoming. And so if you've heard or listened to this podcast at all for a while, I've brought this up a couple times, and our win in our ministry is something that really kind of goes hand in hand with this. And I think David's adopted this in his ministry as well. And I can't take credit for it. All credit goes to Kenny and L. Campbell, because that's who I got it from Grow Curriculum and stuff you can use. But it's just this really good idea of a discipleship formative strategy. And our win is when students take a step in the direction of their faith, or when students take a step forward in their faith. And so while that might not be that's easy, we can chart that on a graph, nobody's faith journey looks the same. And so you're going to have students that have never heard Jesus walk into your room, and they might just hear the gospel for the first time, and that might be their step. You might have others that have been there forever and not really taken it seriously, and it finally clicks. That's a step. And so anything that is that step, that movement towards discipleship, that movement towards formation, is what we're talking about today. And so discipleship is not measured by how much students receive, but by who they are becoming. And so I think, David, the main thing we have to kind of struggle, wrestle with is, I mean, the first question that kind of pops into my mind is, do we need to work on rethinking what success looks like?
Absolutely. I think, before I answer that question, I want us to understand, and this should be obvious, but why this matters is because, forgive me, I've got that seasonal cough that comes with Christmas break and being sick for almost all of it. But we have to ask the question, like, why does this really matter in our context? And you talked about it, Brent. Like, there's this kind of, the reality is that there's this post-holiday overstimulation, and I think a lot of our students are creatively numb. Like, even just trying to get my son back to school yesterday, he was like, while he was excited to go, um, he was also kind of nervous. And then, this morning was even harder to get him to go because we discovered that um, his one of his grades, not all of his, but one of his subjects, math. Let's be honest, it's a hard one. Had slipped a little bit, and we weren't aware of it. And it was one of those things where it was like, as parents, oh man, how did we not know? And then how did we not know? Like, and the different things like that. And so, in talking to our son about it, he ended up getting super discouraged and was like almost scared of school now because he's never messed up before. Like, it's always just come so easy and so natural to him, and this is the first time. And it's not like he was anywhere close to failing, but this is the first time he didn't get an A in something, and he was like, "What if I'm dumb now?" Like, that's literally what he thought. Is like, "What if I'm dumb
Yeah.
now?" And this is his first, like, at 8 years old, he's discovering for the first time what it means to not live up to your measure of success, and what he's always known as success. And so, when that conversation came down to, was it hard? He goes, I kinda. And I'm like, okay, did you ask for help? No. So you just struggled by yourself? There's the lesson, like, it's okay to ask for help, and don't be afraid to. And I saw so much of myself in that moment that I was like, oh, and so it's like, as parents, you kind of, but I mean, I think that's where a lot of our students are. It's like, how do I push into this next semester? For some of them, maybe they didn't do well last semester. And I mean, overall, he did, sorry, overall he did great, but like, there was one grade that he didn't do so great on, and so his goal for this semester is to do better, and to ask for help, which is great. He's already made goals and stuff like that, but it's one of those things where it's like, so why this matters is because we need to ask ourselves, and the same thing with our faith, when we go through a big struggle of any sort, whether it's a life struggle or um, a lot of students struggle with faith after a big thing happens in the church, like maybe a youth pastor leaves, or fill in the blank, some kind of hard life event, and your faith gets shaken because of it. One of the things that becomes hard for a student is they start to become overstimulated by pretty much everything. Like, when you struggle with something, it's like a lot of times we look for sort of an escape from it. And what ends up happening a lot of times is we ignore the problem by turning to our devices. And so we become overstimulated because of that. Then couple that with the fact that they got a break. And as you mentioned, my kids, same thing. Like, he got more video games, more screen time in 2 weeks than he gets in the entire semester. And it's like, that becomes this foggy haze. And then you add life pressures and frustrations and stuff like that. And so the question can becomes, are we discipling students to consume the spiritual content? And so, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling hard. Uh, can you ask the question one more time? I
Yeah.
went
No,
into a whole trail there.
Yeah, you're good. It's just this idea of like, do we need to rethink success when it comes to um, what we see on success and discipleship? Because I think a lot of times we look at this idea of like the pressure to keep students engaged, and we
Yeah.
think that the more that students are here, the more that they are being discipled. And maybe that's not what we need to be looking at, because I think that's been something that churches have kind of fallen to, and I think this new kind of I don't know, this new average attendance thing that we've seen kind of pop up over the last 5 to 10 years, to where like people would say that they're a regular attender of the church if they come once or twice a month. Um, I maybe we need to focus less on them getting them there, and maybe more about where they are and what they're doing.
Yeah. I'd
And
agree with
so,
that for
like, do
sure.
we need to rethink this idea of success? And maybe, like, where do we start looking in the process to make that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, and having some kind of structure for personal devotion to your faith, I think, is where we start. And we've talked about that just a couple of months ago with some of the resources that we had talked about with the um, remind me of the name of it that y'all use for your. We brought a guest in to talk about it. It's fire, fresh fire.
Oh,
No,
fresh fire. Yeah.
fresh fire. Yeah, okay. I'm looking at adding that this semester, and so incredible, incredible resource for helping not only keeping your students on like a daily track of where they need to be, but also for us to be able to look in it and see where they are. Like, are they spending time in the Word? What are they talking about? Like, do they have, like, especially if they have like public notes, and you can look in the notes and see like, oh, this is something that they're struggling with because they were vulnerable enough to allow me to see that and stuff like that. So knowing where they are. But I think that's where we have to be really intentional in the relationships that we've built with these students. I think it's easy for us to build a relationship and to sort of drift into, I don't necessarily want to call it autopilot because I'm not sure that that's the right term for it, but we get into a rhythm and dynamic in our relationships with our students to where I think sometimes we can start to, maybe instead of autopilot, it's more of an assumption that they're good until they tell us that they're not. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think, having those, like, one benefit of the traditional side of the denomination that Brent and I are in the Wesleyan culture, is asking the questions, how is it with your soul? And it's more than a, hey, how you doing? I'm good. Busy but good. The typical questions and answers that we always get. How are you? I'm good. Busy but good. And it never goes any deeper than that. And so, it having those weekly check-ins with your students to say, hey, how are you doing? Things good at home, things good at school. You know, um, what's one or two things that you're working on this week, and is there anything that I can do to help you? Some of those little questions like that could lead to some really cool organic conversations with your students, but helping them to, sorry, in this idea of rethinking success, maybe the success is getting back to sort of the heart of our ministry, and that's the relationships that we have with these students, and really checking and seeing how they're doing in their faith journey. How are they, if the step towards their faith is being more consistent in scripture reading, then let's actually check in on them and make sure they're doing that. I think
Yeah.
sometimes we can coast.
Sure. No, and I think as far as that goes, I think that's good. I think the other aspect that we kind of, to take it a little farther out to the big picture, I think the other thing that we need to just kind of work on is, I don't know where this idea popped up in church, but like it is one of the most ludicrous ideas I've ever heard. And the idea that information equals transformation has to die. Head knowledge does not make a Christian. Application makes a Christian. And so with that, like the dangers of over programming and the dangers of like trying to get students in the door for every single activity, every single event, every single time you have something that you want them to be at, like the danger of over programming is the fact that you are filling them with head knowledge and not giving them any application. And so students know about faith. Most students would say they know about Jesus, but most of them would also say that they struggle to practice their faith regularly. And if we're honest, I bet there's a lot of us that are still in that boat too, because this has been a dynamic that has plagued the church for decades. And so with this, how do we move, like the process of like, how do we lose this idea of information being important is, first off, I think we have to redirect or readdress the way that we approach teaching. I think a lot of times we get so focused and so built in on these like program driven ideas, or we just get this really awesome looking curriculum that has everything done for us. But then like we lose the idea of application. Like, when is the last time that you had a sermon in your youth group where you not only taught them the gospel or taught them an avenue of something in the gospel? I mean, let's be honest. There's conversations that need to happen outside of Scripture, but they need to be heavily influenced by Scripture. But when is the last time you've done a sermon in your youth group where you've actually had at least a 5-minute conversation on how to actually apply it when you leave the building? I think a lot of times we really like to hear ourselves talk, and we really like to share this cool information and knowledge, or maybe it's through study, maybe it's something that we already know. And sometimes it's just exciting to share that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I'm in that boat too. I love sharing stuff when I learn stuff. There's especially when it comes to like biblical archaeology and stuff like that. I love looking at all that stuff and sharing it and talking about it and stuff. But like at the end of the day, if I go up and just talk to my students about this dig that's happening in Israel right now, and then I just leave it there, like what is the significance of that other than a piece of history? There's really not. You if you have any conversation, even if it's just, hey, like, this is the story of Jesus, and like you leave it at head knowledge and never allow the students to work towards the practicality of why that matters, like we're missing the point. And so I think the first step, if we go towards like moving out of this like digital overload, is we have to stop overloading them. Like, and that sounds so duh. Yeah, so duh, so countercultural. But like, we do it more and more and more. We feel like we have to step up our level of competition because the world around us is stepping up their level of competition. And it's like, maybe we don't. Maybe instead what we need to do is just say, hey, I know you couldn't come to youth tonight because you said that you had counseling and you just had a long day at school. That's totally fine. If there's anything we can do for you, let us know. We'd love to pray for you. However, go home and rest. Go home and actually take a night off. That would be, I do that with my youth group and my students, and like it's mind-blowing because I have a couple students that do that every now and then, and they're just like, hey, like, would it be okay if I just didn't come tonight? And I'm like, yes, like 100%. You don't have to ask my permission.
Right.
But like, that's the world that we live in, is they are so worried about what other people think that they don't even think about themselves. It's what other people want them to do.
Oh, for sure. And I think that... Oh, sorry.
No,
Continue.
you're good. You're good.
I think it comes down to, we think that we have to always be innovative and bringing the latest and greatest technology, and I think that's super helpful. Obviously, we want to have as many opportunities to reach people because, as you said, I mean, all of our journeys are a little different, and we need to have a variety in ministry. But we also need to remember at the core of everything that we do that this is still enough. This is still enough. It's like if you stripped away everything out of your ministry except for this, it's enough. And it's like the one thing that you never have to explain because guess what? Scripture stands for itself and it explains itself. You know, the more we can get to the heart of who Jesus is and who he's about and making this the most important element, then we're doing okay. All the other stuff is great. And I'm not saying eliminate those things, but remember that this is the most important thing that we will ever give our students is Jesus himself. And there's you guys know that Brent and I love music and we're both, wearing multiple hats and stuff. Um, but there's a song that's been absolutely wrecking me lately, and I don't know how I missed it, but I didn't hear it until literally yesterday. But there's a song called "At the Heart of It" by Benjamin William Hastings. Have you heard it, Brent?
Mm-mm.
Um, it is a beautiful song, and you can tell it's a song written by a songwriter who deeply feels, and I guess from a lyrical standpoint, I just resonated, but he, he goes through this whole story of trying to get back to the heart. I'm so sorry, of what it was like when he first encountered Jesus and when he first started writing songs. And every chorus is a little bit different and he adds a little bit, which is cool. But the final chorus is um, so profound and it hit me in a big and deep way. And I think this is where so much of our students are craving. But it says this: so now I'm just trying to get back to the heart of it. I'm trying to get some warmth back in my daily bread and sing with the infinity of stars inside of your arms that know whose they are. I'm just trying to get back to the start again. But since I can't go back, hear this part, but since I can't go back, I might as well advance and run into those everlasting arms. You didn't bring me this far to leave me in the dark, so I'll find you on the other side of hard through life. Though life left its mark through wrinkles and scars, I'm just trying to get back to your heart. And I'm like, man, I think that's where our students are. Even though they haven't lived a long and full life, a lot of the students that we have in our ministries have, encountered Jesus when they were kids. And many of them are now approaching the 10, 15-year mark, or not 10 or 15, but I'll say the 10-year mark of being a Christian. And you've talked about this a little bit, Brent, and certainly talked about it a lot at our camps that we do together. But students get to this place where they hit a rut and they go, man, I just don't feel like I feel God in the same way that I used to. And I was so excited and I was so like everything was so new, and why is it that why am I not as passionate as I used to be? And so I have to rededicate my life to get back to this feeling. And you talked about like it's not just a head knowledge, but it's also not just a feeling either. It's somewhere in between of knowing Christ and knowing him in your heart and then applying that to your life and what that looks like. And so I think a lot of our students beat themselves up. And so it just comes down to let's get back to the heart of God. And the heart of God is the very basic traditional tried and true practices. And it's become such a cliche Sunday school answer, but if you want to know God, you gotta spend time with God. And if you're going to spend real time with God, that means you're going to have to open your I'll end on this because I can't stop coughing. You're going to have to spend some real time in Scripture, and you're going to have to let God speak to you, and you have to shut up and listen. As a person who opens his Bible more to help people, more to encourage people, more to write a sermon or help in a devotional, when was the last time I truly just did a Bible study for me? So and I'm not, not too proud to admit, like, the last time I did a true quiet time for me, where I wasn't at a conference, I wasn't at it, somewhere else. It's been a long time. And yesterday I started one, and I was so encapsulated by Ephesians, which is one of my favorite books of the Bible. And I was dealing with something that I've been trying to ignore for a long time in my life, and getting to Ephesians gave me a fresh perspective on a topic that I didn't even know I was ignoring in my life. And so I got excited again. And I left my Bible open intentionally so that as soon as I got back to my office, I'd go right back to it. And so now I've spent, I don't know, a total of 3-ish hours in Scripture that is meant for me and me only. I'm horrible at that. I'm horrible at that. This is the
Yeah.
first time in a long time that I've gotten back to the heart of Jesus for me and not for anybody else.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something
No,
there's something I'm
I'm
going to learn about this in this time, if that makes sense. I don't know what it
I'm
is
there.
yet, but I'm going to learn.
I'm there. No, and I think that's the idea. I mean, and that's like I said. I mean, it's something that's plagued church as a whole for a long time, and I think one of the things that like we have to kind of work towards is like how do we move, like what are the steps that you need to take in your ministry for the listener of this, where we compare our ministries, and compare is a dangerous word, so I'm using it lightly, compare our program driven aspects versus our practice centered aspects, and how are we utilizing opportunities to make our ministry practice centered and practice oriented instead of just doing this program after event after event after lesson, and really not giving the students any opportunity or any inkling of a chance to actually practically drive in the message. And so with that, Romans 12, 1 through 2 pops up into my head, and it says, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. And so, I mean, this goes into any avenue. I can learn and become the most, like, the foremost knowledge in financial application. Like, I can look at investments and stock brokerage and research and all those different things. I can look at trends and data and all that stuff. But if I never have a way to take it out of my head and apply it and learn it through the application process, that knowledge means nothing. However, businesses somehow or another, and schools somehow or another, have this like wonderful idea of like, hey, maybe when we learn something, we need to immediately make students practice it. Why don't we do that in church? If you have junior high students that are sitting through a 7th or 8th grade math class, say 7th grade, because my son's in 7th grade, he goes to school. He's in class for 45 minutes. He hears and gets taught a new concept for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then the rest of the class is a paper or an assignment that is working towards practical understanding of the thing that was just taught. And sometimes they even take it longer than that. You have homework. And so with this dynamic, it's like, what do we need to start doing to work towards making faith be something that's more practically understood? Is maybe we need to start doing the same thing. Maybe instead of a reflection point at the end where they think about it for 2 seconds, maybe we need to start doing a take-home practical application. Or maybe it needs to be something that we have on a text that gets sent to their phones after they leave, and say, hey, here's 3 things for you to try this week that go around this lesson. And some of y'all are like, man, I can't do that. I don't know how I'd do that. I'm going to be honest, utilize your resources, and ChatGPT is one of the best resources out there for stuff like this. Because I'm not saying ChatGPT writes your lesson. I'm saying you come up with your idea, you come up with your topic, you come up with the content of your material, and then you type in to ChatGPT and you say, hey, I need 3 practical applications that students can do this week for this lesson. And then ChatGPT will fire out ideas. And it's really, really good for that. I use ChatGPT for small group questions. I don't get it to write my lessons. However, I do use it to utilize my, let's be honest, probably already overused and overexhausted brain by the time I finish my lesson. And so I'm like, hey, here's the content. I just need 10 questions to go with this.
Yeah, I mean, you could literally upload your entire, like, especially if you're the kind of person who does manuscript style. I'm not, but I use like an outline. But like, if even with an outline, if you literally just take your outline, copy paste it into it, and then let it spit out. Of course, check everything that it says. Make sure that
Yep.
it lines with your vision. Make sure it lines most importantly with scripture. But most of the time, it asks good questions. Like that's I don't really use it very often for like hardly anything. But there are moments where when I want some questions to sort of dive deeper, I've used it in that sense, and usually I'll pick like one or two that really stand out to me, and then I'll ask a few more questions based on like some of the conversations I had that day. Because a lot of times too, like you finish that night and then someone says, "Hey, what about this?" Or "I was thinking about this. What do you think about this?" So then you take those questions and you add it to the deeper questions that Chat GPT gives you, and all of a sudden you have 3 to 4 really good solid questions to get them to think deeper.
Well,
And make
and
sure they have your scripture on there.
yeah, and I want to just jump out and throw 3 different ideas or 3 different books that do these well. And it's just this idea of taking this idea of a faith concept and throwing some sense of practical application to it. Now, I don't want to just say that, like, you have to say, hey, when you get done with this, I need you to do these 3 things before we go to school, before you come back to youth next week. Like, there are some weeks that's probably okay, but there are other ways to show practical application too. Put stories in your sermons. That is a way where students can see it practically applied and say, oh, I can do that. And I think there's some people that really, really, really do this well. And 3 books off the top of my head, and they're all kind of different dynamics. And so this kind of helps out too. If you haven't looked at or picked up the book Jesus Freaks by DC Talk, like that is 100% just, it is a entire book of martyrs and people that have died for their faith. Like different 3, 5, 10-page stories of different people in different countries that have died for what they believed in. And it talks about the different practical applications of why their faith was important and why it was so important that they chose to die for it, and some absolutely wild God things that have happened in the process. Another book. This is a little more popular of a book. It's Love Does by Bob Goff. And it's a completely different aspect because Bob Goff does a really, really good job of telling a life story and then applying scripture to it. And so he'll tell a story. He tells a story about how he met his wife and how he courted his wife and how he like basically relentlessly pursued his wife to the point to where it was at first his wife was like, I don't know if I really like you. You're kind of like, you're kind of a lot, to this like, wow, he is genuinely pursuing me with everything he has. And so like this story kind of migrates and moves, and then he talks about how like Jesus has this God, or how God has the same dynamic and same aspect for pursuing us. And so he talks about these practical applications, and he uses real stories and real situations that students can put themselves in to where they can grasp it and understand it better. And so those are really, really good. Another one that's it's the same premise as the DC Talk book, but I like it as well. But Toby Mac did it by himself. It's called City on Our Knees, is another one. It kind of has the same idea of stories of different Christians and different believers, but he has a little more narrative in that book. Also a really, really good one. Bob Goff has written other books. They're all good too. And most of them follow the same idea as Love Does, but Love Does was the first one, and it was revolutionary as far as a book. One of my favorite books of all time. But so with that, I think the dynamic though is like, I think sometimes we get into this like, well, like we're good pastors. We have to have 3 points to our sermon and we have to have 3 points to our applications and stuff like that. No, you don't. 3 points is just there to help clarify what your point is. But like, you don't have to have that. If you have a story or you can utilize something that makes your point click, do it. If you don't, then that might be something that you work towards the application of like, hey, this week, as you're thinking about this lesson, try to do these 3 things this week.
I would also encourage you to, in this is like, yes, we're adding more to what you would normally do. And I know that for some of you guys that are especially volunteers, that could be a challenge. Remember always, utilize the people that you have around you, whether that's your adult leaders, your student leaders. Man, student leaders are incredible at this too. Like if you have 2 really good student leaders who just absolutely love your ministry and love the other students in your ministry, utilize them. Say, hey, this week, will you text, say if you have 2 leaders, break it up and say, hey, you guys, this student leader, I want you to text this group of students and just ask them how they're doing this week. And then do the same thing here. And then maybe take, say you have 2 students and 2 adult leaders. Well, look at that. Now there's 5 of you pouring into all these students. And so between the 5 of you, hey, I want to make sure that every student gets a text at some point this week, just a little midweek checkup or whatever it might be, or like a Saturday thing or Friday, whatever it might be, and just check in and just see how they're doing. And not as a, hey, did you do your homework kind of thing, but as like a, hey, just want to make sure you're doing okay this week and just want you to know that you're loved, and honestly, your adults love that already, but those student leaders, you give them a task, they're gonna hit it out of the park, man. And that's one of the things I love is watching our students check in on each other. Man, that is one of the coolest aspects.
On top of that, that's practical application. You are literally teaching your students to care for other people. Hey, I need you to check in on these 5 kids. This is your flock. You need to go after these 5. Make sure, text them weekly, make sure they're doing good. Let me know if there's any big problems, or if there's something that I might need to have a conversation with, or feel free to throw me in a group message with you, me, and them if something comes up. But I want you to be the primary contact to where you check in on these 5. But I will say, if you challenge a student to check in on those 5, make sure you have someone checking in on that student. 100%. I think a lot of times we throw student leaders out there and then we're like, hey, you got this, go. And then we don't ever check on them because we feel like they've got it.
It's like that thing that happens with us. Like, how many of us got thrown into youth ministry and they're like, hey, you know Jesus, you're good at teaching, you know the Bible, you should be a youth pastor. Great, now go do it. How, when, why, where, all the questions. And we turn around and reciprocate that same thing to our students. Like, let's equip them.
Yeah.
Don't ever forget that the most important job that we have as student pastors of any sort, whether you're volunteer, full-time, no matter what, like, our most important thing is to equip students to have a faith journey of their own. That is theirs and not their parents, not ours, not anybody else's, but their own. And so we have to give them tools. And so, you're 100% right. Like, check in on the students who are doing things. Yeah. Like, it's a whole circle of life, so to speak.
Yeah. And so to kind of close out this idea and kind of get us headed towards the end, I think there's like if you look into the dynamic of Jesus, like Jesus did not transform the disciples. Jesus did not start the movement that he did with just head knowledge. Jesus invited the disciples through participation. He said, "Hey, I'm going to show you, I'm going to teach you this, but then come do it with me. I'm going to teach you this, but then I'm going to let you see me do it here, 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 here." Like, and the number of times that the head knowledge just didn't click until they saw it played out and they were like, "Oh." Like, once again, all of the things that we say in this podcast, especially when it comes to discipling students, you can almost just look at the story of Jesus and be like, "Oh, hey, it's right there." Like, wow. And so with that, there's like a huge importance to this dynamic of inviting your students to participate. Don't just sit them there. Invite them to be a part of your ministry. And I say your ministry loosely because you should be the last person involved in your ministry. Like, you should be in the background so much so, at least in my opinion, and some people might fight me on this, and that's fine. You should be in the background so much in your ministry that people don't know you're there. Because you are teaching others to do ministry. Your job is to equip disciples to go make disciples. Okay? So if you are the main person on stage and you are the only one that says anything and does everything, how are you equipping people? I have high schoolers teach. I have high schoolers do social media. I have high schoolers do worship. I have high schoolers do everything. I am the high school pastor. Every dynamic of everything that I could potentially hand off to high schoolers, I do. There are very few things that I'm like, okay, I have to do this. This is mine. Most of the time, those involve talking to parents or keeping parents involved. Because I'm not going to let a high schooler send out the parent email. That's probably my job. But
Definitely is your job.
yeah. So with that being said, though, how do you work towards it moving from head knowledge to participation? How do you invite them to participate? And then your challenge, I guess, this week would be more of just this idea of identify one ministry rhythm to redesign. Replace a teaching moment with silence, with reflection, with creative response, with something that builds that practical aspect and that participation to where students can take what you said and go, "Oh man, that works, that fits, I can do this." Faith is
Absolutely.
caught through practice.
Yeah. We have to take time to reflect and to stew in it, because I think sometimes it's like, okay, let's get through this whole thing, and you talk and talk and you talk, and it's like, all right, see you next week. There's never a moment for people to sit in it and to allow God to do the next. Because if we teach all the way to, you know, if you get out at 8 o'clock, if you teach to 8 o'clock and then they leave, it immediately, and they don't get an opportunity to actually ask themselves, number one, what did I just learn? Why is this important to me? And how do I apply it to my life? Then they're going to walk out and knowledge is gone. They're going to start talking to their friends and it'll just be gone, or they'll
Yep.
start thinking about the next thing they have to do in our busyness culture. And so taking some time to go, okay, what does this mean for you? And allow for a time for students to ask questions. Allow time to, maybe you turn on some soft music and say, hey, pull out your journals. And that's what we do. We like to give them five or so minutes just to journal. What is it that God spoke to me today, and how do I apply it to my life? And
Yeah.
allow them to write it down, because there's something about the physical practice of writing something down where they can say, this is what I learned, this is why it matters, this is how I'm going to apply it. And what I always tell them is, make it practical. Your next step should always answer the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so if I'm learning about being still in the presence of God, when am I going to be still? Where am I going to be still? What time am I going to be still? How do I be still? Different things like that. Just those little things when they can say, okay, at 7 o'clock in the morning on Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm going to practice just being still in the presence of God. Now it's a
Yeah.
practical step. I know what I'm
Yeah.
going to do. I know when I'm going to do it. And I know where I'm going to do it. It's going to happen right, not in my bedroom where I'll be tempted to do other things. I'm going to go to the kitchen, make some coffee, and I'm going to sit at the table. And this time, so now I've got an intentional place. I've got an
I'm going to
intentional
leave my
time.
phone in the other
Uh
room.
huh. Intentional place, intentional time. I'm going to be still at the table. I'm going to drink some coffee, and I'm just going to let God speak.
Yeah.
I'm going to take some deep breaths. Stuff like that. Give them something where they can take the topic, marinate in it, and then ask them how they then apply it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think the other aspect of that, and once again, this is biblical, like these are not new ideas. Okay, Matthew 7:24 and 25. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them, will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house. Yet it didn't
My house was
collapse.
built on you.
I know, because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house, and it collapsed. It collapsed with a great crash. If we're honest, this like massive fall from faith that we've seen, this generational thing that we've hopefully are kind of moving out of, it seems. It looks like we're kind of moving back into this application involvement strategy with young people. Like if we're honest, that I forget what the word is, deconstructing, yeah, they're deconstructing faith and stuff like that. That was the house on the sand. That was this dynamic that like they heard it, they heard it, they heard it, they heard it, they never acted on it. And so we need to be sure that we are giving students opportunities to act on what they hear, to set their feet on the rock so they can actually withhold the storms that are going to come in their lives. And I bet that you have students in your ministry that you can look at and be like, "Man, without a shadow of a doubt, that kid is standing on a rock. On the rock." And there are kids in your ministry that are like, "Man, without a shadow of a doubt, that kid is sinking in sand." So we need to benefit both of them by continuing to practically apply these ideas of faith, these ideas of scripture that will work towards transforming them to do it. And so much so that this is what I'm doing with my ministry, and this might be something that you're going to do with yours, because I literally just came up with this. When we stop recording this, I'm going to text 5 key leaders in my high school group that are all students, and I'm going to say, "Hey, I want to meet up with y'all next week. Find some time that all 5 of y'all can get together. I'm going to invite my other adult leader for the high school, and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this idea of practical application. And I want them to come up with it because I want them to be the ones that make it, because they're the ones that know what's going to impact them and their peers the most." So that might be something that you need to do. I'm literally going to do it. I'm going to send the text as soon as we get done with this episode. But it is something that we need to start taking more importance and more focus on, and allowing them to be in the conversations, allowing them to participate in their faith more, and not just give them head knowledge. Transformation doesn't happen with information. Transformation happens with participation. So, with that being said, David, anything else?
Sir, that
Okay.
was a great way to end it.
Faith is caught through practice, so make sure you give your students opportunities to practice. And man, we love you guys. Thank you for another year. It's wild that we are moving halfway through year 5. And I don't know about you guys. Once again, we'd love to hear from you. We have listeners every week. We have tons of people that listen to the podcast, but man, we'd love to hear from y'all. So shoot us a message on social media, at Talk Student Men on Facebook or Instagram. You can reach out to me or David on social media as well. We're pretty easy to find. You can find us. But we'd love to hear what you think about the podcast, how we can improve, what we can do better. If there's a topic you want us to cover, because our goal is for this to be for you guys. And we are super, super grateful for the fact that you are still listening, and maybe you're listening for the first time too. And that's awesome. We thank you for your listening. Thank you for allowing us to keep doing what we're doing. We find so much joy in life in doing this. And quite honestly, it's been more therapeutic for us than you guys will ever know. And so with that being said, we hope you have a great week. Feel free to reach out to us on social media. Feel free to share this podcast with other people, because I had a conversation with someone yesterday that didn't know about our podcast, and they were like, you've been on a podcast for 5 years. How do I not know about you? I was like, we don't advertise.
That happens all the time. Yeah.
We don't advertise. We don't put money towards this at all, because, hey, guess what? We're youth pastors too. And we have we have places that our finances need to go. And so word of mouth is our way of advertisement. And so if you would do that, we'd appreciate it. Just for the sake of, we want it to get out to as many youth pastors as possible, because at the end of the day, we want the youth pastor that needs to hear this to hear it.
Also, I want to throw this out there because this absolutely blew my mind. But we have this midwinter retreat that we do at our camp, our local camp. And I had a couple of students that I had mentioned actually last week's podcast episode, and the idea of the New Year, same God kind of thing. And the students were like, whoa, that's really good. New Year, same God. I want to hear that. And I was like, well, just so you know, it is geared towards youth pastors. And they're like, it's a Christian podcast. That's going to be beneficial to us. And so, and the funny thing is, the person who said it is actually one of Brent's students, Zoe. And she was like, yeah, I want to listen to that. So apparently a couple of them went and listened to it that night, and then they came back the next day and they were like, so good. And they're like, man, and a couple of them were like, I forgot that you guys have a student ministry conversation podcast. I want to start listening to it. And it's interesting to me that this podcast that is geared towards ministry leaders can also be encouraging to the very students that are, that we're serving. And I guess that makes sense on paper, but I never thought hey, our students could get just as much of a benefit out of hearing the things that we're struggling with and things that we're trying to teach them in, because then they understand the why behind why we do what we do. So anyway, I just, you might have some students that are like, hey, I want to go deeper. It's okay to share it with your students too, because now I'm realizing students want to hear these conversations just as much as we as leaders do, especially the ones that are considering ministry.
And I don't know if it's still the case, but I had a friend. I had a friend in town that doesn't really go to church. A couple years back, when we were in the first couple years of this podcast, tell my wife, didn't tell me, but my wife shared it, and she said, I listen to your husband's podcast every week.
Wow.
Because it is the most, I think she said it's the most I've ever learned about Jesus. And I was like, she doesn't go to church. She just was like, hey, you have a podcast. I'm going to listen to it. And she was like, it is the most I've ever heard about Jesus. And I was like, this isn't even for you.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, so.
Yeah, it's easy to underestimate what
Yeah.
something that is intended for one thing that
Yeah.
God can still use for other things. So anyway, that just kind of blew
Well, and
my
it's
mind.
it's huge encouragement for us too if you're listening to
Yeah.
this and you're still listening. I know we've rambled for a
Yeah.
second, and
No
I
kidding.
appreciate you listening, but it's huge inspiration and encouragement for us. So if you have a story like that, we'd love to hear from you as well. And so yeah, shoot us a message. We'd love to do it, and I mean, if you're okay with it, we'd love to share it too. But until next time, we hope you have a great week. We hope you're starting your semester off strong with youth, either this Wednesday, this Sunday, or next Wednesday, like we are. And we hope that you continue to grow. We hope that you are continued to be encouraged and inspired to be the best youth pastor you can be for the church that you're in, because that's the heart of this show. We are here for you. So if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know. And until then, or until next week, we hope you have a great week, and we will see you for the next episode.